Hey everybody, it's Jenna. I feel like I could keep making videos about Thunderbolts. I loved it even more upon second viewing. I'm already itching to see it a third time, and I'm in awe of the ways that it seems to have revived the Marvel fandom. There's an energy to the fan fiction and fan edits and discussion and hype and genuine fun that people are feeling around these characters that I genuinely don't think I've seen since the 2012-2014 days of the MCU. But I teased it in my last video, so I do have to talk about it. I want to talk about the ways that this movie deals with its characters' pasts and traumas. It simultaneously does and doesn't feel like a revelation, but it feels so necessary with where we're at in the world of superhero stories. I'm not going to do my usual decade-by-decade trek through the history of superhero comics, arguing that there's some grand sweeping pattern that led us to where we're currently at. Because the fact of the matter is that basically every decade of superhero stories has been filled with good and bad takes on characters' backstories, and the trauma and grief that could result from them. Even as the medium of comics has grown less limited and more ambitious over time, there have still been modern stories that disregard or butcher what could have been really good emotional moments. And of course, there have been plenty of retcons and reboots and overhauls that have complicated things even further. But it's still undeniable that when we think of a superhero or a supervillain, we usually think of them as having some sort of tragic backstory, some sort of loss or hardship or obstacle that either influences the way that they suit up or the way they change their methods of doing so. Sometimes these backstories are cornerstones of the character from the second that they're created, and sometimes they're added along the way, which can completely reframe the way that fans engage with the character in question. Sure, there are some characters who aren't defined by these moments at all, either to intentionally make the character stand out or because they've just been too unexplored to have a tragic backstory yet. But the genre is arguably defined by characters who mold their pain into action, whether for good or for evil. As superhero stories have gotten more mainstream across the 21st century, we've seen more and more of these backstories told on screen, which has also changed the way that we talk about them as a whole. Uncle Ben being shot, Thomas and Martha Wayne being shot, and Krypton blowing up have all been presented to us so many times, they've basically become running jokes that induce eye rolls and complaints from fans if they think they'll have to sit through them one more time. And then as you get further outward, there have been backstories presented to audiences in genuinely great ways or in ways that completely miss the mark. The audience is told that these origin stories are important, but they are needlessly convoluted from the start or become convoluted to the point of losing their impact. I think in the process, a lot of us have grown almost desensitized to what these events actually mean for their characters and what emotions they can have as a result of it. The three that I just mentioned, the complete loss of a person's homeworld and the culture within it, and the death of their parental figure literally right in front of them, is the kind of thing that would fundamentally change any person. Even when it leads the character to their calling as a superhero, that calling doesn't completely make the pain or anxiety or depression go away, but the way they choose to respond to those emotions helps further their heroic standing to us, the audience. It makes it even funnier to me, in hindsight, that the project that completely redefined the way that a lot of us look at grief—
What is grief, if not love persevering—
has its protagonist turn that grief into controversial actions that are still debated to this day. It's also exactly why so many what ifs and alternate universe scenarios have basically become what if X character got Y character's gimmick and or origin story, because changing one variable makes us look at those pasts in a whole new way. I'm not saying that every single superhero story needs to be a therapy session, or that there isn't room for jokes about these super well-known backstories. I particularly love the gags that Teen Titans Go uses for the Wayne murders and Jason Todd's death. But to me, it's important to acknowledge the often universal emotions that are behind these fantastical backstories or tragedies or traumas. Thunderbolts understands this balance in a way that honestly exceeded my expectations, especially within the confines of the MCU. The entire movie is rooted in its characters' emotions and trauma, in a way that is relatable and heavy, but also extremely watchable. For starters, it isn't afraid to find its sense of humor in that trauma. One of the most successful jokes of the movie to me might be when they're reuniting in the void after being trapped in their respective shame rooms, and Bucky jokes that he was fine because he had a great past. It's something that we know is categorically untrue, but is still delivered perfectly. It also doesn't drag us through extended flashbacks of every character's tragic backstories in order to endear us to them. Instead, it just uses very intentional lines of dialogue or flashes of certain moments in the void to catch fans up to speed, even beyond what was covered in the character's previous MCU appearances. Still, each member of the principal cast of this movie is driven by their respective grief and trauma, and the various ways that they have tried and failed to outrun them. Each of them has been molded by the different military machines that they originated from. I have an entire video on that topic if you want to hear more, but also from genuinely human experiences that have happened to them along the way. Abusive parents, drug addictions, family issues, and the like. And each of them hasn't really been afforded the space to acknowledge that, because of their trauma, they've been moving through life lonely and sad and, in Yelena's words, without a purpose. They then find their purpose, but with each other. As they escape death and discover various things about each other, they stick together during their mission not because they have to, but because they genuinely know it's the right thing to do. Because maybe, if they join forces, they can stop a little bit more pain from happening in the world. They can try to stop Bob from being manipulated into Valentina's government-controlled Sentry, they can save individual citizens from falling shrapnel, and they can venture into the void, the manifestation of their deepest, darkest parts of themselves, to help save each other. Even amid the CGI battles and the teases for future movies, this movie has an approach to the human experience that is refreshingly honest. I know I'm not alone when I say that I saw elements of my own struggles with mental health and the friendships I've formed along the way reflected back at me in this movie. I know that isn't a completely universal feeling, but given the events of this decade so far, it's definitely arriving at a time and with a depth that feels like a breath of fresh air. That depth is even more impressive when you think about how, in the grand scheme of things, most of the events of Thunderbolts really take place in less than 24 hours. And yet, these characters have grown so attached to each other in such a short amount of time that they can't imagine not sticking together, even before they're all cemented together as the new Avengers. I've still seen some discourse about how the movie's roster should have, for the sake of diversifying its superhero action, had Zemo or Frank Castle or Bullseye or Abomination. While it would have been fun to see any of their respective traumatic pasts brought to the level that Thunderbolts operates at, I do think adding any of them would have kind of missed the point. This exact combination of characters needed to be together, for their similar gimmicks, for their unresolved emotions, and for the fact that they all teeter the line between the dark things that they are doing and the good things that they could be doing. I think those shared connections are a big part of why fans are caring so strongly about these characters so quickly. It feels like the interpersonal dynamics that we wanted from 2012 Avengers, based on the fanfic tropes that spun out of that movie, but with actual emotional intimacy and vulnerability beyond just being co-workers.
He's a friend from work.
Sure, Thunderbolts isn't the first or last superhero project to tackle trauma in some sort of way, but the way that this movie does do it, while still being the big start of summer blockbuster that people get their extra large popcorn and icy for, is kind of surreal to me. Time will only tell how the movie's vulnerability bleeds into other superhero media, both in the MCU and beyond, but like I said, given the events of this decade, doing so will add an extra catharsis to the communal experience of watching these movies together. Superman being rooted in Clark balancing his Kryptonian and human heritage, and Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow seeming to lean into Kara's own justified anger and trauma, at least tells me that the destruction of Krypton will be given a fresh emotional nuance. But at very least, Thunderbolts is making us stop and recognize that the emotional nuance is there, both within the fictional heroes that we love and within ourselves. What did you think of Thunderbolts and its approach to trauma? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends if you haven't already done so. Merch is available at the link in the description. As always, you can find me on social media at Hey It's Jenna Lynn. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, go read some comics.